Hans, thank you very much. It's an honor to do this today. I wish we were all in person, but I think we all have our fingers crossed that we'll be together next year in May. So thank you for that introduction, and honored to be able to question you, Maria. So the description of this particular segment is the COVID-19 pandemic has caused disruption around the globe. As the legal, commercial, and personal implications continue to evolve, legal departments have been assisting their companies to navigate the fallout of the pandemic. While working to support our companies, we also have to prepare for the day after, as it seems that day is getting closer. So Maria, I want to start with a quote that a political philosopher famously said: "There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen." And I feel like that captures where we are today. Before we get in too much to the pandemic and what we see as evolution from the pandemic, I'd love to get for the audience a little bit about your history. You've got such an important position. You've held so many different important positions with some of the leading companies of the world. And I know people want to understand your story a little bit for those who don't. So if you don't mind sharing that with us.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I would like to repeat that I am very glad to have the opportunity to speak with you, to this a very qualified audience today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And then I will answer your question. It is an interesting career, I would say, because I started in Italy, as you can hear from my accents. I'm Italian, and I started in law firms. And if you ask me in the beginning of my career, I wouldn't even know what an in-house lawyer does, or that I would end up being an in-house lawyer. I moved to the UK when I was still young, even though I had already qualified as an Italian avvocato. And once I moved to London, I re-qualified as English solicitor and worked for a British-Italian law firm. And that's where I started to have interact with in-house teams. Around the year 2001, I decided to go back to Italy. I was homesick, and I wanted to go back to my country. And at that time, I started to look for a role that would be truly global and international. And that's when I understood that in those times in Italy, there were not many international law firms yet. And if you really wanted to have interesting international work, there would be better opportunities in companies. And that's when I joined General Electric. And I believe that as an in-house lawyer, I was formed and I learned everything I know there. It was a fantastic company that had a wonderful legal department where lawyers are basically doing what law firms do in-house. It was organized in a way that you have specialists and generalists, and I joined as a generalist in the oil and gas business. And thanks to that opportunity, I started to travel all around the world, negotiating with oil companies everywhere. And personal aspect is fantastic, because when you have to negotiate a contract, you have to understand the personality of the negotiator that you have in front of you. And this is the part of my job that I still enjoy the most today. I don't do many negotiations at this point, only big acquisitions maybe, and big licensing when I was at Nokia. But there is really something that I enjoy, and now it's replaced by the human aspect in leading teams. So after GE, I spent in GE a very, very long time at various roles, always in GE oil and gas. Then I moved to the Tetra Laval group, where I was hired initially as CDL, which is a smaller company within the group, with an understanding that if I did well after 3 years, I could have taken the general counsel role at Tetra Pak, but actually I got it after 1 year. I was lucky, went well, I did well, and then I got this promotion much faster than expected. And in Tetra Pak, it was a totally different world. It's for those who don't know, Tetra Pak, it's a company that specializes in food packaging, and in particular liquid food packaging, milk cartons, juice cartons. I'm pretty sure you have seen them in supermarkets. And it's a very strong company that is considered or has been considered to have a dominant position. Therefore, all the competition law aspects were very relevant. And of course, the intellectual property aspects were very relevant as well. Then after a few years, I got down to join Nokia Siemens Networks, which was a joint venture 50-50, owned by Siemens on one side and Nokia on the other. And the idea was that they wanted to do an IPO. So I was hired to do that IPO. By the time I finished my notice period, actually, Nokia had already decided to purchase the 50% from Siemens, and there was no IPO. And I even didn't know if I had the job in a few months after being there, because in the meantime, Nokia sold the device and service business to Microsoft. So there were two general counsels, one for Nokia and one for Nokia Siemens Network, and only one would stay. I was selected. I was very, very happy, of course, and humbled. And that was a wonderful opportunity because I participated to the transformation of the company. And there were so many big transactions that happened in the years when I was there. But sometimes I feel every year I worked the amount of work that I worked generally in 3 years in the past. And I learned a lot. So we did the acquisition of Alcatel-Lucent, and then I got the assignment to monetize with a wonderful team of IP experts the intellectual property portfolio of Nokia. What happened there is that when Nokia sold the device and service business to Microsoft, it gave a license and it kept all the patents. And that portfolio was so important because there were so many standard essential patents that are critical for telecommunications. So we didn't need a license back from companies like Apple, Huawei, Samsung, and we had very important patents that they needed. So we worked on a plan to monetize that portfolio. And when I left, the recurring revenues were about 1.2 billion euro per year. And that's a big, when you think the cost is not that much at that stage, it really helps to have that business. Very super, super exciting job. I only have great memories of Nokia. And then I now am here, as you can see the ABB poster behind me. This is a company that is also going through a transformation. So it's a cultural transformation and a business transformation. So from the cultural standpoint, we have a new CEO that joined about 2 months ago, and we are transitioning to a decentralized company. So this company was very much centralized. There was so much done at corporate level, and also there was a lot of power given to the countries. Now we're transitioning to businesses, and businesses need to be self-sufficient, and it's not anymore in this matrix country business that it's things are decided at the country level, they are decided at the business level. So I'm very happy to participate to the cultural transformation of the company. And in this context, I hope that as legal and integrity, we can take a central role. And definitely COVID, as much as it has been a huge challenge for us, it has also given us more visibility and the opportunity to have a more visible seat at the table.
Yes, no, it's fascinating and a propitious time to move to a business unit perspective, as the nature of different business units, and ABB has so many, have changed, and we have to all be aware of those economic changes. Is there one thing before we get into the last few months is there one thing that you would share with some of the more junior in-house lawyers in the audience that you're really happy you did, or that really helped you elevate into the positions that you've had?
I think that the most important differentiator for an in-house lawyer versus an outside counsel is to be a strategic business partner. When I talk to my team, I always try to visualize our role like a triangle. I say we need to be professionals, therefore we need to know the laws and the regulations that are applicable to our business, and if we don't know, we must find the time to study them, because we need to be able to give the answers that the business expects from us. We cannot all the time rely on outside counsels. So that professional aspect is very important. Second, I say we need to be gatekeepers. So sometimes the business gets excited about things, and we always have to help to find solutions. But there are times where we have to be able to say no. And the good thing is that if you always find solutions, when you say no, the business takes you very seriously. They know it's a real no, and they follow what you're saying. And then the most important part is to be a strategic business partner, to sit together with the business and make decisions with the business. I'm not the kind of lawyer who says, on one hand, you can do this, on the other hand, you can do that. You choose what you want to do. No, I like to choose together with the business. And if you want to say intelligent things and be accepted at the table, you need to understand the business. So my suggestion to younger colleagues is study your business, understand what are the drivers, understand what are the most important goals every year, because it's not something that it's static, it's dynamic. In these times, it changes very often. So you need to have clear in your mind what is the risk map of the company. And there is always an enterprise risk management team, so it's easy to get hold of that. And what's the strategic paper? The paper that goes to the board. You need to know the strategy of your company, because how can you make decisions? How can you decide which risk level is the right risk level you want to take if you don't know what's important for the company? So sitting in a company and not knowing what are the revenues, what is the objective for the year, it's really bad. But when we are junior, sometimes we are so focused in that one small thing that we are doing that we don't see the big picture. So I wish I had seen that since the very beginning. It's very important to have that understanding. So when you get the video from the CEO who talks about strategy, don't think that it's a waste of time. Watch that video.
Yeah, it's and I've heard a lot in talking to people in your position around the globe the last few weeks, that vulnerability is in vogue, that I'm sitting in Park City, you're sitting in Zurich. We all kind of are in each other's homes, so to speak. I mean, sometimes we're doing one of these and a kid will pop in or a dog will pop in. I mean, there's some pretty funny examples of it. And that vulnerability of being willing to ask the questions of your business team so that you understand it, their perspective on the world, is what I hear over and over, and that this pandemic has given us that opportunity. It's so interesting because your CEO joined basically in the middle of the pandemic, as I understand it. So, as somebody used to change, can you talk a little bit about the evolution in those first few weeks? I mean, I actually happened to be in your home country, when Fashion Week was closed down. And so, I kind of witnessed this almost slow motion response to the pandemic that countries took. Can you talk a little bit about that first week to 2 weeks as people were coming to grips with the magnitude of this pandemic?
That's a good question. It is interesting, as human beings sometimes really cut out something that is pretty logical and it had to happen. If we all knew what was going on in China, especially in global companies, it was pretty clear that there were offices that were closing, that the situation was very serious, and still, when we were doing risk assessment in these companies, but also in other companies, we were looking at the risk that the pandemic could come here as a remote risk. But we were not saying, okay, no, it's forbidden to travel to the skies. The governments were not closing borders. China itself was not closing its own borders. They were not saying, we have a big issue, we are not letting, people travel out of China to other countries. Actually, you were at the Fashion Week. There were a lot of Chinese people, because it was around Chinese New Year, traveling into Europe, into Italy. They say maybe the reason why there were so many in Milan there were so many cases in Milan might be that. The fact is, we were somehow blind. At ABB, I think, were maybe also lucky that we had a big presence in China. We have big presence in China. So we followed all the steps in China very closely. And because ABB is a provider of critical infrastructure, despite 1 or 2 weeks of closure of the factories, then the government came and asked us to reopen our factories. And we agreed procedures that we would follow for our factory employees in China. That helped us to develop a very good model that then we were able to replicate everywhere in the world. So we immediately created a global task force, and I was a member of the task force, where we were looking at what is the minimum standard that we want to have everywhere in the world. And then we would have country task forces that would take that minimum and then adapt it also to the local standards. And in many places, our requirements were actually much more stringent than the local laws, because we were basing what we were doing on the experience that we had developed in China. So, for example, we had factories in Italy where even before the government said that you had to take certain steps, we were already taking the steps. Our guiding principles in these very difficult times, and of course we had tensions. Everybody has tensions. It's not easy to make decisions on the spot while these things are happening. Our guiding principles were, first of all, we want to keep our employees safe. And second, we want to ensure business continuity. We had to continue to work. We couldn't say, now we stop. We had to do it not only for our stakeholders, but also for the communities in which we live, because people need electricity. And in some of our departments, we provide, as I said, critical infrastructures.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were on the cutting edge of, this concept of personal protective equipment and how to keep employees not just safe physically and their health, but also mentally comfortable that they could go into work and not risk infecting their families, and possibly, they might be in situations where they lived with people who were highly vulnerable. And so are there any tips that you would give to the in-house lawyers on this call about lessons learned as your approach to keeping working employees safe evolved?
I like very much your comment that you have to look above the aspects, the actual safety, but also the mental safety. So all the presidents of the businesses have been very active in communication, because the majority of our office employees have been working from home for a very long time. That personal interaction that you generally have, it's gone if you don't take an extra effort to keep it alive. So I have seen very similar approaches from the presidents of the businesses that we have. They have been doing videos, they have been doing web chats, they've been sending written communications, and we have learned to use a lot of tools. I can say when I joined ABB from Nokia, I was a little bit surprised, because at Nokia I was used to that in my team everybody was working at least 2 days from home. And here I had all my team in the office. So I was wondering, oh, this is a little bit strange. It's a different culture. And I was telling the team, well, why do you come every day to the office? And it's interesting how things are now changing rapidly. So we are getting used to use all the various tools, Zoom, Teams, Skype, really all of them. And I think it's changing in a way that I don't believe we will ever go back. I was talking with a friend over the weekend, and I made a parallel. On September 11, 2001, I was traveling to New York, and I was diverted to Newfoundland. When finally, after a few days of sleeping bags in a church, we were allowed to go back, they told us you cannot take liquids on the plane, and if you have scissors, you have to throw them away if you had them in your hand luggage, all the things that now are pretty normal. And in that moment, I thought, okay, now they are doing all these things, but then it will go back to normal. And when you think about it, it never went back to normal. Actually, now nobody travels with liquids. You don't take with you any scissors. You don't take any things that. And now we're feeling probably we will go back to normal. Yeah. Everything will be as it was before. And well, no, it will never be again as it was before. I'm convinced it will not. Things will be different, and we will get used to a new way of working, and probably it's going to be better, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's right. I'm going to resist the urge to spend 15 minutes hearing about that story, because many people have seen the Broadway or the musical From Away or something like that. Your experience. So what a fascinating topic for another day, but I think you're right that we will learn through that. I want to talk to the audience for 1 second. If you have a question, I will try my best to weave it into the flow of our conversation. You go to the Q&A button at the bottom and ask it. And we have gotten one that I think is interesting and, subject to anything confidential. If you can take us into those group task force, global meetings about the pandemic, what were some of the fulcrum discussion points that you had? What were the various, pockets of difference opinion that had to be kind of wrestled to the ground, if you will, so that you could figure out how to execute on your return to work strategy or get to work strategy?
So I can tell you that the conversations evolved. These were like 1 hour call every morning at 7 a.m. for a very long time. And now we moved into weekly calls, and actually now I delegated my participation to one of my team members, because now it's almost business as usual. When we started, the first step was to actually make sure that our pandemic task force procedure, which existed because we are a very well-organized company, was right for the case. So we looked whether we had a possibility to cover all the major issue with that existing procedures, and adapted it to the specific case. And therefore, we started discussing who else should we bring into the task force. So we're looking around the room. Do we have everybody? We had HR, we had business representatives from all the businesses, we had communications, we had, of course, IT, because IT, was a big issue. Suddenly, you have to work remotely. Actually, initially, we were not yet working remotely, but we envisaged that this is where we are going to be, and we're going to be in this situation everywhere in the world. So VPN, how many more do we need? Bandwidth, how much do we need to update our contracts? This is a very simple topic. Then safety in the factories, big topic. Do you want everybody to wear masks? Do you want everybody to take tests? Test not available, you cannot do tests. How about if one person gets infected? What are the rules that we are gonna follow? And the WHO guidelines and the country guidelines in some cases were diverging. Which one do you take? Always the most restrictive. That's always my answer. But it's so basically we were looking at safety, verifying whether there were cases, discussing what we would do with cases. There was, for example, a letter that many companies received from a famous, I'm sure that some of the lawyers online received the same letter from a big investment bank, because there was a conference that had happened where a banker who participated after a few days found out that he was infected with coronavirus. So we had to decide on the spot, what do? We had a lot of people at that conference. Are we going to send everybody home? And how about the people who were close to this person? And let's assume we decide to keep these people at home until the 14 days have passed. What else we do with the people that these other people met in the office? Because at that time, we didn't have yet social distancing in the office. Now it's very simple because, first of all, we only allow up to 30% to be in the office, and people have to come only if strictly necessary. And when they come, they have to respect the 2 meters social distancing rule. And we even write in the doors in meeting rooms how many people maximum can enter in that room at any given time. So even if somebody comes to the office and has a problem, we feel that with this in place, we shouldn't have risk of contagion other employees.
Yeah, that's great. And so much to follow up on in a thread there, really. Talk a little bit about, as you've moved to a more decentralized structure, right? Talk about the nuancing in the communication. Obviously, you've got to have a very consistent company-wide communication. But as you go around the globe, is that one size fits all, or are you nuancing the communication of PPE and how people stay safe and all the things you're describing at the headquarters?
Yeah, because of the structure in which we organized, where we had the global task force and then country task forces, we had a few global communications that were really at high level, and they were coming from the vice president for HR or from the CEO. And then we had the local communications because we wanted to adapt the message to the local laws, to the local regulations, but also the local culture. Mm-hmm. And also the point in time of the development of the virus, because there were countries were not affected at the same time. So we had to adapt to the situation, not only the regulations. And therefore, there was a big component of local communication. And in this role, my team members played, in this task force, my team members played a very important role because the local lawyer was always involved. And I have kept direct contact with some of them where there were major issues. I would be in touch with my team members sitting in that task force so that we could brainstorm and make decisions together.
Mm-hmm. So you talked a little bit about the refinements, harkening back to the 9/11 story, and we've all changed how we work. We're able to actually interface from our homes now. What are some things that you think changes for the in-house legal function after this pandemic ends? What are the things we never go back from?
So I think that there is for sure an opportunity for an accelerated digitization. We were already on that path. And I believe that this horrible situation we are living, it's on the other hand presenting an opportunity for us to learn to work in a more digitized way. I refer to using the tools. Very often we are comfortable talking face to face, doing things in the old way, like we have always done them. And suddenly we have been put totally out of our comfort zone where we had to swim or sink. And we have learned to swim, and it seems we are doing it very well. So remote working, I think it's going to stay. And I'm not saying that people will work all the time from home. I don't envisage that because we miss the human interaction, but we realize that actually we can be very productive working from home. So it's a mix. This will bring savings for companies on real estate. So I am pretty sure that companies will take the opportunity. I read over the weekend that Twitter already informed all its employees everywhere in the world that they will never come back to the office, never. So that's a clear example. And generally, these US companies, especially from California, are faster in making changes. But I think that's something that we might see in many other companies. For myself, I'm pretty sure that I will do with my team more video conferences. I noticed, for example, that in the beginning, nobody was comfortable putting on the video. I don't know if you have had the same experience. You used to do conference calls and people would be on voice, but no one would put on the video. Now it's almost normal that when you talk to somebody far away, you immediately turn off the video. And like you and I, we spoke and we had the video on immediately. I'm pretty sure if we spoke a couple of months ago, we would have not even thought for a minute to have the video on. I find it very useful because it helps with facial expressions to understand how the conversation is going. And quite frankly, also to stay more focused, because sometimes if you have these conference calls, you put it on loudspeaker and start doing other things. And that's not good. With the video, you stay more focused. So I think this will help. Also, we are starting to use more tools. We did a brainstorming exercise for our values. We're renewing the values at ABB, and we're looking at the purpose statement for our company. And we used a very interesting methodology where there was a presentation, then people would vote, then would ask questions in writing. It was so efficient. I don't think that if all these people from all around the world were in one room, we would have been more effective. So I think from this standpoint, the remote working, but also the distance learning is becoming more of a possibility. And distance learning, it's very important for integrity, for example. We have had forever the online training for integrity. All companies have it because you cannot think of traveling all around the world to train all your thousands of employees. We have 140,000 employees. But then for specific, very difficult topics, we tend to organize in the classroom training. And now it's clear that there is a midway. There is the distance learning with this kind of tools that are interactive. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to use those tools to do more interactive integrity training. So that's definitely something that we will do and will do more of. Another one that I want to mention, also relating to integrity, is data monitoring, because we've been doing audits with traveling, interviewing people, doing the investigation on site. And there are a number of tools that are already available for companies to purchase to do data monitoring, to try to anticipate issues, to catch red flags. And I think that now that we cannot travel, we're pushed to use more of those tools. And this is another transformation that is a positive one.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. You perfectly segued into what I was wanting to talk to you about next, which is the use of artificial intelligence, big data. How to mine our data to do things more efficiently and better. And ABB is obviously a leading company in those areas, robotics and AI. So where do you see, if you were to predict and get your crystal ball out, where do you see that legal departments would start to use big data to more efficiently deliver services to business units?
Definitely in the compliance integrity area, the way in which we conduct audits is going to be very much influenced by the possibility to anticipate issues. It's like now our customers in the field, they do diagnostic with data. We have to look at red flags with data rather than just running ambulance and trying to resolve issues when it's too late. That's definitely an area where I see huge opportunities. Then on the more traditional legal side, due diligence is something where we are already using it and we will use it more and more. I think that in the future, when you do an M&A transaction, you are going to do a lot of due diligence using artificial intelligence more and more and more. But I go farther than that. Something that actually I was already doing with my team and Nokia is starting to review current customers' terms and conditions with tools, with machine learning. Definitely, that is something that is doable. At least there are already in the market tools that highlight the deviations from your standard. So when you're going to review the contract of your customer to align it to your standards, you already find some highlight parts that are where the major issues are. This when I was in Nokia, we had a back office in India, and we could implement that tool in India easily because it was concentrated in one place. You had a small number of people to be trained, and we did a test. We gave 100 contracts to a group of lawyers in the back office and the same number to another group that had the tool. And we found out that they were 30% faster and more accurate. So definitely, this is just the beginning. I think that that's the evolution. We will have more and more of that. And this is not a threat for our profession, actually. This is enhancing, because if humans can work together with machines, then you can dedicate the time to add more value, to do that strategic partner role that is so important. It's not just doing the redlining that makes you a great lawyer.
Yes, it's so true that I think, especially for lawyers, it frees us up to do where we add value, and it also puts a higher premium, as you said at the very beginning of this discussion, on understanding the business and nuancing, because that's what the machines aren't able to do quite yet. It's fascinating. So one of the search terms that before we probably wouldn't have cared about is the famous word force majeure now, or the famous term force majeure. I was told by one of my colleagues that there is a California, or maybe it's an Oregon winery called Force Majeure, and that they're doing quite well, as you would imagine right now. You spoke a few years back about litigation and about how litigation can be extraordinarily wasteful, and you talked about managing litigation and business risk around it more efficiently. Can you talk a little bit about litigation specifically and how you think the pandemic, I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, we've got these clauses, but if we assert force majeure in one instance, we've got to worry about it being asserted against us in a different instance. And so how will this pandemic, if you had to guess, change the way we approach litigation strategy?
I really hope that people will be reasonable when this is over, and then we will take the bill at the cash and say, okay, how are we going to split the bill? because we are in this all together. And it's clear that there will be companies that will have claims against other companies. And we will be on both sides of the equation, as you correctly pointed out. So we have to take a commercially minded approach. If we take a so-called legalistic approach, even though we are lawyers, we run the risk that we just generate an enormous cost for the industry, which is an enormous litigation cost. I believe we have to try to be reasonable and remember that we have to continue to do businesses with the suppliers, and we have to continue to do business with the customers. So we have to be reasonable, and we have to look at finding win-win solutions. There is no better time than this, where it's useless to try to win because nobody's gonna win in this context. So my approach is going to be with my team to try to be really commercially minded and find a way, a path that avoids litigations. There will be a number of bankruptcies, and that's something on which, of course, is unavoidable, that there will be litigations, that there will be the courts involved. And that's the sad side of this story. It's the huge impact that, in addition to the human side that we all hate, and the fact that we are all losing our loved ones, that people that are close to us. I don't think there is anybody who doesn't have a person close that has been affected directly or indirectly by this terrible virus. So we are all touched from the human standpoint, but also we are all touched economically. And the consequences are so big, are so enormous. Everything that could be said has been said regarding the magnitude of this situation we are in. So trying to be reasonable, it's what I would advocate. And it's the same thing I was advocating. I know to which conference you are referring to when I was saying that the litigation is a waste of time and money, because sometimes it's unavoidable, and of course you have to litigate, and I understand it. But most of the time in a commercial environment, you can find an agreement, and that's the best outcome for everyone.
Yes, it is. And do you think, one of the audience members asked a question about negotiations? Do you foresee that just like our internal teams are evolving to meet in person by video, do you think business-to-business negotiations will be more restricted going forward and be more online and less in person? Or do you see that we need to have that in person for big deals?
I think that it's good to have one in-person part, but then you can follow up when you have established the trust. And the same thing goes probably for board meetings. I think it's very important to have in-person meetings, to have the dialogue in person, to establish the trust, the relationship. But it's equally fine, once you have established that, to follow up with video conferences. So I believe that there will be less business traveling. When I look at my past, especially when I was negotiating the license agreements with Apple, Huawei, it was almost all at the same time. And I was traveling so much that I got affected in my health. And if at that time, maybe I could be a little smarter, maybe I could have done more video conferences, but I don't remember any video conference. It was either in person or conference call. And now there's going to be this third possibility.
I may get this wrong, but I saw a statistic this morning that the Zoom is as valuable based on the stock price as the top 7 airline companies right now. So something has changed a little bit. There's also been a question about the structure of ABB and thinking about how you guys are organizing. I know your business units have become decentralized. How are you supporting legally the decentralized business units? Will you start assigning, or have you assigned company legal counsel by country now or by business unit?
So that's interesting because, of course, if you want to be a strategic business partner, you have to duplicate the business organization. So we were organized totally by countries. Mm-hmm. And then now we have done already a first step, which is to appoint one general counsel for each one of the 5 businesses. One business is actually being divested, so there will be going forward 4 general counsels. Then there are certain areas of expertise where we have decided that we will continue to have a central team, because it would not be efficient to duplicate for each one of the businesses a center of expertise. So we will have a central M&A legal team. We will continue to have corporate. Of course, we need to work with one board of directors, so it's a central corporate. Then one area that I have, since I joined, reinforced is litigation. We actually want to have a central team that assesses all our portfolio of litigations and then makes a business decision as to whether we should continue to litigate or not. If you think about it, insurance companies, they have like a portfolio of risks, and they decide how they manage their risks. And then they have a portfolio of litigations, which are all the claims that they get. And they decide what to settle, what not to settle. They apply some logic in what they are doing as a portfolio. So centrally, we need to look at our litigations as a portfolio as well, to have that commercially minded approach. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, we will have an integrity. We have already a central integrity team that is divided in 2 parts. The proactive side that is closer to the businesses and will be inserted in the businesses, while the reactive side, which is the investigation team, where we have the experts that do interviews, conduct investigation. This is central by definition. So that's the way in which the team is going to be structured. Then we have lawyers in the countries, and these are the generalists. And for now, we are monitoring to try to understand who spends more time with the business rather than the other, so that we can have the lawyers in the countries wearing 2 hats. One is the local hat and the other is the business hat.
Fascinating. So if you had a mentee, a daughter, son, nephew, niece, going into the law right now, and you put your crystal ball on, or you were advising somebody on this call who manages a legal department, is there an area of the law that you think, because, since January of 2020, would be one that you think would get hotter for in-house legal departments than another area? Is there something you think we're going to see more of?
That's a good question. If I think what I needed a lot in the past couple of months is regulatory. Mm-hmm. That's an area that really is important, and I don't see that importance becoming lower. It's very, very difficult to know at any given time all the regulations that are applicable to your business, especially when you have a global role. So you need to have a system in place that is able to give you an early warning when regulations are changing. And in that couple of months, in this last couple of months, regulations have changed once or twice per week everywhere in the world. So that has taken it to the next level, really. And therefore, I think that regulatory as part of the integrity compliance function, is going to be more and more important. The compliance function has been very, very relevant in the past years, but I think it's going to be more and more. So that's an area. Then I wouldn't know really. I remember the chairman of Nokia, when I was there, introduced my last AGM at Nokia by saying the lawyers will be replaced by machine, by Maria. And so I don't think so. I think lawyers will continue to exist, and what will be relevant is this business strategic approach. So compliance, business partner, these are the areas where I would focus more.
No, it's fascinating. I'm so honored to be so integrally involved in ACC Europe because we've talked about the evolution of the seat at the table for in-house lawyers in Europe versus other markets, especially the United States. But this is such a highly government solution-based pandemic issue that we're dealing with. And so I agree with you that the lawyers, it's not just a kind of should have a lawyer at the seat of the table. It's imperative right now to have a lawyer at the seat of the business table because it's all the promulgation of laws moving very quickly. And so the points that you emphasize, I think are I couldn't agree more. They're so important to understand that. We're out of time, so I have time for one last question. You've been fantastic, and the big data reason why you've been so fantastic, or it's certainly proof of it, is very few people have dropped off. We had a certain number of participants, and it's pretty much stayed the same the whole time. So obviously, people really appreciate your insights, and we appreciate their attention. Is there one thing along the way through this pandemic that you started out thinking it was heading in one direction, but you've had to course correct along the way and go, no, actually, we need to do this more, or we need to do this less? Is there some change that throughout the last 12 weeks, you've thought of things differently?
That's a difficult question. I think there've been a couple of changes in the communications that we have received from governments for which we had to adjust the way in which we behaved. For example, the use of masks. This is the one that came because you didn't anticipate this question, so it's a total surprise. No. Yeah, so
unscripted.
The use of masks. This is an interesting point. I don't know if you remember, all the governments at one point said it's dangerous for you if you wear masks, except for China. And I was trying to apply logical reasoning and I couldn't get it. If it's dangerous, then why are doctors wearing them? There is something that I don't get in this. So our health and safety team wanted to be good, and they did a video where they said, guys, stay away from wearing masks because they are dangerous for you. And I got this video. It was late at night. I was looking at it and thinking that the implication from the responsibility of the company standpoint. And I was like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I said, I know you did the video. You spent a long time. Can we please stop it? Can we avoid putting it online? Can we dig a bit farther before we approve it? And then we didn't publish it. And then after a few weeks, the world changed. Now, if you go around without mask, people think, oh, look at that washed person going around with no mask. So you have to be very, very careful in these cases. For me, the lesson learned was, yes, there were some guidelines that were saying, no need, only those who need should wear them, but they were not going to the extreme of putting in writing in the guidelines it's dangerous. So there were all this explanation with the dangerous things. So let's be always careful and do the reasonability test. Does it make sense to you? If it doesn't, take time to make that decision?
Well, starting with the first question you answered, it is apparent to me, and I suspect our audience, that you have been put in positions of such great responsibility because of a really terrific blend of legal acumen with pragmatism and business knowledge. And I know I've gotten a lot out of this conversation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the honor that ACC, Hans, and the rest of the board have given me to be the one to ask you questions, and thank you for your time and attention.